Well, good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Wherever you're listening around the world, a very warm welcome from London in the UK. Here is today's news in electric cars and sustainable transport. My name is Martin Lee and this is your EV News Daily for Tuesday, the 30th of January 2018. And we start with some congratulations. Mitsubishi have cracked 100,000 sales with their Outlander plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. According to electrive.com, the car that was first released in October 2013 has now sold 100,000 models in Europe. 10% of European sales for Mitsubishi Motors going to the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. The country that likes them the most, that would be here in the UK. Great Britain has bought over 34,000 of them, and the Netherlands buying over 25,000. A popular choice in many parts of Europe. And staying with European manufacturers, Volvo have announced that they will expand their portfolio with purely electric vehicles in 2019. Of course, they were one of the first major manufacturers to say that all of their models will be electrified in some way by 2019. Autocar magazine says their first pure EV will come next year. It'll be a coupe-like hatchback in the same size as the S40 and V40 models. Now, they're building it upon their Compact Modular Architecture, their CMA system, as all of the big car makers will do. If you're Tesla and you've got 2 or 3 or soon to be 4 models you're making at the same time, they can be relatively custom. But if you have hundreds of models, like the biggest car makers, you need some sort of modular way of keeping the costs down. Now, the R&D boss of Volvo, Henrik Green, did hint to Autocar that they'll be looking at a range of around 310 miles, that's 500 k's, for their first pure electric vehicle. But this is really interesting because whenever an electric car comes out, particularly recently with the Nissan Leaf, a confirmed 151 miles on the EPA rating we heard last week, there's always some people that go, not good enough, needed 300, not good enough, wanted 400 miles, not going to buy it, I needed 500 miles range. Now, Henrik raises the point of how they design an electric car and how quickly things are moving. He says it's quite different to developing a car compared to 5 or 10 years ago. You set a prerequisite 3 or 4 years before a car's launch, and then you used to run towards that target. And if you did that well, you came out with a competitive offer. These days, you set your limitations for the battery and your range that you want, and then with improvements and cost savings, 3 or 4 years go by, and all of a sudden you've been overtaken by the competition. From pure electrics to plug-in hybrids, and over the weekend, the Express newspaper here in the UK reviewed the first plug-in hybrid from Jaguar Land Rover. The Range Rover plug-in hybrid has a 2-litre turbo petrol engine and an 85-kilowatt electric motor. That'll get you 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds, 137 miles an hour top speed, and some pretty good emissions as well if you do have to burn fossil fuels, 64 grams per kilometre and 101 miles per gallon average. On the electric battery alone, it'll do 31 all-electric, very quiet, silent miles. And that's very important. If you buy an £80,000, or maybe that's $120,000 Range Rover, you need it to be quiet. You want to be hushed along in style in that kind of thing. You want to be wafted in a Range Rover. And they reckon that 1 in 5 of their Range Rover sales could be for this plug-in hybrid simply because those all-electric miles will be all silent. An interesting point we found later on in the article is the regen braking, which seems to work pretty well down to 7 miles an hour, and then it seems to give up, which they say is a disconcerting feeling. All of a sudden, the regen cuts off at 7 miles an hour as you're slowing down, and then you start to freewheel. A very different way of doing it than the e-pedal, for instance, on the new Nissan Leaf. Moving to Germany, and a new study about the power grid's been published that says around 40% of German cars could be plug-in vehicles by 2035, and their grid would cope, all thanks to expanding renewables capacity. Well, in Germany right now, that's Europe's biggest economy, by the way, there's 46 million small passenger cars. Around 10% of the stock is replaced each year. So as electric cars and plug-in hybrids gain popularity, so the grid will have to cope. But according to this report, thanks to renewable energy, it won't be a problem. Up to 40% of the market can be plug-in hybrids. And talking of renewables, in the USA, renewables overtaking coal is the big story today. Xcel Energy in Colorado put out a request for proposals, an RFP they call it, to replace 2 of their coal-fired generators. Well, it turns out the bids that came in, the renewable bids, were the most competitive. The median bid price, so that means there's some higher, there's some lower. The median average for wind and battery storage was $21 per megawatt hour. Solar plus storage was $36 per megawatt hour. And at those prices being so much cheaper than anything else, renewables are just the obvious option. That means that every mile you drive in an EV gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. But how will you drive those miles? Will you plug in or will you charge wirelessly? Now, wireless charging is not something new, and it's something that everybody seems to have an opinion on. Well, Alex Grusin, who is the CEO of Witricity, is pretty passionate about wireless charging, and he's been speaking to Clean Technica about the myths of wireless charging, and he's debunked them to say anybody that's not sure about this, it's a technology that is going to be here in the future. Myth number 1, wireless charging is slow and inefficient. Plugging in your car, it can range between 85 and 95% efficiency. Wireless charging is now up to 90% efficiency, which surprised me. I just thought wireless charging was far less efficient and far slower. Well, wireless charging is not user-friendly, is the second myth that he's busted. And he says, well, that's not true because you just drive over the charging pad and there's no power cord connectors to plug in. And actually, he points out that the multiple different power cord connectors, not only in one country, but in all around the world. We see this with Tesla having to add the China connector to the Teslas that are being sold there now. The GBT connector, just because it's so popular over there. One standard of wireless charging could mean that technology catches on. Myth number 3, wireless charging leaves you short of battery power, he says is a myth because your car charges overnight over a charging pad. Myth number 4, there are no universal wireless charging standards. He says is a myth. A worldwide recommended specification has been announced and it should be ratified by the SAE sometime this year in 2018. And myth number 5, he says wireless charging detracts from the EV revolution. He says it's false because with self-driving cars, it's going to be essential. He says with the fleet of robo-taxis, who do you think will plug them in? They'll just drive over the charging pads to get more power. Well, that wraps us up for today. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. We'd love to spread the word about electric cars, so please do share this with at least one person who might be interested. And together, let's change the world one electric mile at a time. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow.